What's going on, guys? It's the Unhinged Engineer here, and today I want to talk about a simple yet powerful tool for engineering resumes, which is the XYZ method. So if you've ever Googled just about anything to do with engineering resumes, you've probably heard of the XYZ method before. And despite it being so simple, and that simplicity actually being the factor that lends it its power, people tend to overcomplicate this on the internet a lot. And so I really just wanted to break down what is the XYZ method at its core, why does it work, and what are some tips and tricks we can use. I'm the Unhinged Engineer. I make professional development content for young engineers like myself. And if you're interested in resumes, interviews, salary negotiations, just about anything to do with engineering careers that they don't teach you in school, then this is a channel for you. So without further ado, let's talk about the XYZ method today. So the XYZ method can be defined as follows. Pretty much any bullet that follows this format. It's accomplished X as measured by Y by doing Z. So naturally, the main components of the XYZ method are X, Y, and Z. X, also unsurprisingly, is the accomplishment. You accomplished your accomplishment. What did you actually do? Like, what was the achievement? As measured by Y is your quantifiable results, right? In other words, potential employers want to know that your efforts towards whatever this accomplishment was actually resulted in substantive, traceable output. And that's what Y is all about. Y is about proving what you did was actually an accomplishment by backing it with some numbers. And then lastly, Z is all about the tools or methods you use to accomplish what you did. So accomplish X as measured by Y by doing Z. And so I have a couple of examples here. Totally, these guys aren't on my resume. We'll talk about my resume specifically next. But just to highlight again what we're talking about, the accomplish here is increasing test coverage. The quantifiable result is this 25%. I would argue this is like your methodology and these are your tools. So they kind of both lend themselves to that Z point of the XYZ method. Same thing kind of goes to the bottom, right? The accomplishment was reducing this deployment time. The quantification of that was 70%. And what did they do? Well, they containerized with Docker and they deployed with AWS. So again, XYZ method, accomplished X, resulting in Y, or as measured by Y, using Z. So this is what the XYZ method is all about at its core. Now let's talk about actual tips and tricks to execute this method well. Starting off with X. X is very straightforward. Be creative with your accomplishments. Accomplishments can be anything from a solved problem, building a solution for a problem, an improvement to an existing system or a process, which these two examples. The X component here is use active language. You really want to make it seem like this is a thing that you did and you willed into existence. It's much better to say something like increased test coverage by 4x than it is to say something like oversaw the increase of test coverage by 40% or 4x, whatever. The latter one, the oversaw, literally makes it sound like you sat there and watched it happen. And you'd be surprised how many people take things they did themselves and say something like oversaw or facilitated the development of, or something, some random preposition like that. You really want to use active language. Like you increased test coverage and you reduced deployment time. You didn't watch somebody else do it. That's a really important thing. I think a lot of people make that mistake. With the quantification piece here for Y, the only thing I would really say is just like avoid absolute numbers for a relatively straightforward reason. If you say something like, I improved engine thrust by 100 newtons, like what does that mean? I don't have any context about that number, and thus I'm kind of gonna naturally be skeptical and nerf that accomplishment in my head. But if I say something like, I improved engine thrust by 2x or by 200% or something like that, like that's much, much better, because we all know as engineers, improvements are usually incremental. And so an improvement this large all at once is incredibly noticeable, regardless of what specifically you're working on or what specifically you did. Speaking of specifics, the last point I'll make here about the Z component here is that Z is really your keyword war chest. This is where you can bust out all the keywords that you're desperately trying to get into your resume so that parsers can pick it up and recommend you to an actual human. An example here, this is why I'm saying maybe they're looking for someone who does integration testing. A more fitting example here would probably be Docker and AWS and stuff. A lot of parsers, if they're looking for someone with AWS experience, will look for the word AWS. So Z is your opportunity to get that in there. You don't want to do it in X or Y. You really want to do it in Z. Like Z is where you bust out the tools and the methods or algorithms or whatever that you use to accomplish whatever you're bragging about in the first half of your bullet. So yeah, these are kind of some like pretty generic but also very powerful tips, because the XYZ method, like while being very powerful and pretty easy to execute, doing it haphazardly and not actually thinking about the purpose it serves can get you into trouble, at least in my experience, and can kind of just defeat the purpose of it altogether. I do want to make two notes here before we move on to looking at my resume for hopefully some good examples of using the XYZ method. This might be a bit of a hot take, but I honestly do not care about the order. Like you'll see in my resume we're going to talk about, I actually tend to do accomplished X by doing Z, resulting in Y. This is kind of the format I use myself for a lot of bullets. And just to be blunt, I really don't care about the order of these components. What matters and why the XYZ method is so powerful is it's like a checklist that somebody can use to say, do I include all of the points that lead to this bullet being a complete story? And that's the second thing I want to talk about here. Like the main power, the main utility of the XYZ method is that it ensures each bullet is a complete story. In either of these setups I have going on here, there's a thing that was done, a journey that was embarked upon to get it done, and a resolution, right? Like the falling action after the climax of the story, which is probably your accomplishment, to say like, oh, it resulted in this, positive outcome, hopefully positive, right? Each bullet has its own story. You don't want bullets that are kind of a half-assed or ambiguous story that the reader doesn't really understand what actually happened. Humans think in terms of stories. And so if a bullet is kind of like half a story to just say facilitated usage of AWS throughout the company. How did you do that? Why do I care? What was the result? It doesn't really tell you a story. Versus something like this, there was a goal in mind, reducing development time. And then there was a quantitative result at the end of the story, some closure to the story, which is a 70%. And they tell you, well, what did I do in order to do that? I containerized applications with Docker and I deployed with AWS, versus just saying like, adopted Docker throughout enterprise solutions division. Like what does that mean? I don't know. It's also very passive, getting back to the point about X here. So the point of the XYZ method at its core is really just getting across that each bullet point should be a full contained story. Yeah, and that's why, truth be told, I don't really care about the order. The only caveat I would say to not caring about the order is don't start with Y. And by Y, I mean the letter, not the motive. Motive could be something worth discussing depending on the bullet, but don't start with the number. I've seen a few resumes in my resume roast series that are just numbers, or just constantly assaulting you with numbers. The reason that that's a bad idea in my experience is that before you give the X or the Z, they don't really have context as to why the number matters. So if you lead with the number, by the time you get to the context they need, that kind of moment has already passed. Aside from not starting with Y, I really don't care about X and Z's order. You could start with either, you could say something like, using Docker containerization and AWS deployment, I did this resulting in some factor improvement, whatever. So you could start with X or Z, I wouldn't start with Y. So let's talk about my resume really quickly, just highlight a couple of hopefully good examples of bullets, and then we can wrap this up. I would say for me, this is a really great example of a XYZ bullet. Design, trained, and synthesized neural network for RF modulation classification on FPGA using PyTorch, Onyx, and open source HLS tooling, speeding up inference by 25% at reduced power consumption. So let's break this down. Designed, trained, and synthesized neural network. This is definitely the X component. You can also see I kind of included the motive in here, motive/application. What are we actually doing this for? That's really this beginning piece. On FPGA, using PyTorch, Onyx, open source HLS tooling, that's definitely the Z. This is where I'm getting all my keywords out, like I said earlier. And then this speeding up inference at 25% at reduced power consumption, that's definitely Y. Something I'll note here, I remember from this job, we knew for a fact that the speed had been increased by this factor, but we didn't actually have a very good number for the power consumption, like reduced it by this amount of watts or this percentage or something like that. And because I didn't have a good number, but I knew it was reduced, I effectively just kind of said reduced power consumption. So this isn't the most ideal because there isn't a quantifiable metric, but I have this one here to cover my bases, and it still is like the result, the closure to that story of why we did this immense amount of work. This was a big project, I remember. Similarly, you can see the next one is even simpler. Refactored PyTorch convolution layers into overlap add FFTs for a 3x speed up on digital signal processing ASICs. So again, this beginning piece here, this is definitely the accomplishment. I would say here it's kind of tough, like where's the Z? I would probably say like this is an algorithm and this is a piece of hardware, and then lastly this Y piece is, that 3x speed up. So just a couple basic examples of good XYZ bullets. Let's do a couple more. Here, how about this? God, I remember Julia. That was a weird language. Let's talk about this one next. Combined Julia's multi-processing capabilities with Linux virtual machines running on company servers to reduce training times by over 50% and allow for longer training runs while out of the office. So this is interesting, right? I would say the X, to be honest, the X piece is kind of vague here, which is interesting. I would really say that here, the X and Y overlap pretty strongly, right? Like the accomplishment is reducing training times and doing training runs while out of the office, whereas the quantification here is really this 50%, and I guess this kind of out of office is more of a 0 to 1 like capability. Like I remember before we were doing everything locally on our machine, right? And then being able to do that on company servers obviously was a huge unlock. And then this Z is really the majority of the bullet here. And this is a last thing, I guess, worth mentioning, right? The XYZ method is a guideline to ensure that our bullets kind of contain all the requisite information, but it's not something that's required for every bullet. And this is a great example where really I'm talking about methodology and I'm talking about stuff I know how to do from this experience I had. There's other bullets, which I think this is a great one. There's other bullets that I like to call an establishing bullet. Usually they're first, or at least there's one per project, where this right here, this bullet is really just about establishing what was done, like what this internship project was all about. And if you notice, like there isn't really that strong an XYZ method here. Like this is, you know, the thesis of the project, like what we were interested in. I suppose several reinforcement learning techniques is technically your Z, and the Julia here is Z, but then there's no Y. My point is, like, this bullet kind of establishes like a really strong X, capital X here, for the rest of the bullets to leverage off of. While I am saying each bullet should contain like a full story, even that is just a guideline that can be violated selectively to make your resume flow a little bit better. And so yeah, just overall, you can go through my resume even more here. Like not all of these follow the XYZ bullet exactly, but I stand by these bullets for the most part because they really follow the North Star of resume bullets that XYZ method enables you to do, which is each bullet is its own story and tells an integrated, holistic journey that the recruiter can kind of read, understand, and move on to the next one. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Honestly, I'm a big fan of the XYZ method, and that's why it kind of annoys me that people make it more complicated than it seems to be. They also adhere to it more strictly than they need to. Really, this is just a guideline that a lot of people find incredibly useful, myself included, but ultimately guidelines were made to be applied to certain circumstances where necessary and even violated where necessary. And so I think the XYZ method, like it's the most important part of it is understanding the core purpose of it, which is ensuring the telling of a holistic story, and then everything else is just kind of a means to that end. So I'd like to think that my resume has accomplished that end really well, and it's definitely gotten me the result I've been looking for. So if you are looking to get the results you're looking for in your engineering career, then this is definitely the channel for you. I'm a young engineering professional. I'm figuring all this stuff out as I go. And so if you're looking to watch somebody learn about all the aspects of engineering careers that you don't get taught in school while they're going through it, rather than like 20 years ago, then this is definitely a channel for you. Thanks a lot for watching, and I will see you next time.